feel all chunky, man. I got this new shirt that's not quite broken yet.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Ironically, with the Imperial Yeast thing.
Nice.
Who's our sponsor for pro brewer interviews.
Are they?
Yeah.
Hey, how about that?
I mean, they're a sponsor for anything that
you gotta
Chop and Brew
represent.
does, really. So, got a crown. In this episode of Chop and Brew, we learn about brewing with unique fermentables, specifically wild rice and cassava, as part of Bad Weather Brewing Company's ongoing Heritage Lager Series, bringing new life into lagers of the past. This and all pro tip interviews are brought to you with support from Imperial Yeast, whose new Imperialis hybrid series features Capri, a blend of Imperial's popular hazy IPA strain Juice, and their Loki Voskevike for juicy ester aromatics, tropical flavors, and bright citrus notes. And the Patreon party people. Join them in supporting the show and get bonus content from Chop and Brew HQ at patreon.com/chopandbrew. So we're back here in the side room of Bad Weather Brewing Company before the tap room actually opens for the day. Thanks for sneaking me in.
Of course.
Bootleg style. We're here with head brewer Andy Ruhland once again, and we are enjoying the third installment of the Heritage Lager Series. If you remember, we came and had the corn lager that was kind of collaborated with the old schoolers at Schmidt Brewing.
Yep.
Then you did a second one that we'll tack on at the end of this,
Sure.
which was like a cassava root beer, post World War II era, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But what we got for number 3?
Wild Rice Pilsner. So, modeled after James Page Brewing of brewing lore from the early 90s, I guess. They were a small microbrewery in northeast Minneapolis and known as the first commercial brewery to make a beer with wild rice.
That's cool.
So I thought that would be kind of a fun homage to our native grain.
Yeah.
Now closed Minnesota brewery, reached out to one of the former brewers, started the conversation of a collab, and then here's the end result. So
nice.
Yeah.
So wild rice is particularly important to Minnesota, I think the upper Midwest in general, but like there's kind of this like really bloodline vibe with wild rice, so that's awesome to see it in a beer. I've brewed with it a couple of times, usually in darker beers, so it's really nice. Talk me through a little bit, like who you tapped on the shoulder and kind of how you got to this version of the beer.
Sure.
First off, they had a beer. It was a lager.
They had 2 beers, if I'm correct. One was a wild rice pilsner, and then I think their Bach beer was also wild rice. I think they had 2. And Jim Hoft is the former brewer at Page that we teamed up with. So it's kind of modeled after their wild rice pilsner. So they used a pretty basic mix of 6-row malt, and then about 20% wild rice. Okay. And then a little splash of some Cara 20. And so we've brewed I think 2 or 3 beers with wild rice, dark beers. I've never done like a pale lager before. So I was really interested to see what the color would be using 20%. I've used maybe 10% max in a grist, and we have always had a distinct wild rice flavor in those beers. So, but this is kind of what they did. So I did a hot steep a few days before with just the wild rice, just curious to see what kind of color we get, and it was just like a pale straw color. So there wasn't going to be a lot of color pickup from which surprised me. Okay. You know, it's kind of dark brown looking grain when it's puffed and cracked open. So
cool. I mean, I feel like a smaller, more concentrated amount. Like when you cook it, I feel like it definitely gets like a tea-ish color. Yeah. But maybe that's because you got like a cup in half a cup of water.
Yeah, it was a 20-minute hot steep. So, and that was another kind of fun trial for us. You know, we've used wild rice in the past. We've always pre-cooked it, almost like a mini cereal mash. You know, you have to gelatinize that stuff, and it takes a while. Wild rice takes what, 45 minutes when you're cooking it at home. And, and we used to buy a puffed wild rice for a little while from BSG, but they stopped selling that a few years back. So talking with Jim, he's like, no, you don't need to cook it, just mill it. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. Really? So that was a fun thing for us to try. Just like, all right, we're gonna mill it, and then you should, you know, really kind of, it should puff up, and it did. It, you know,
puffed up when it got wet.
Yes,
when
you know,
it was mashed.
it's such a hard husk, you know. It's and even our mill, like I had our mill as fine as it could go. You know, the rollers were almost grinding on each other, and it still barely cracked the wild rice.
It's still spitting out like whole grain rice.
So I was a little worried. I was like, well, I'm just gonna roll with it. So, but you know, once we started graining out, we could see, you know, it was soft, and it definitely had exposed what we wanted from the wild rice.
So they just treated it as a grain.
Yeah, that's what they did.
Put it in with the grist.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Jim and he'll always joke about this, because he would get in arguments with, he would tell me with, I think, Sig from Schmidt, and then I think maybe somebody down at Shell's, back and forth on wild rice. Like, you got to cook it. Jim's like, no, you don't. And they would have this kind of banter back and forth about it. And I've done both, and they both work. So, I mean, but it's funny to hear those guys going like, no, you need to cook that wild rice. And Jim was like, no, you don't. You're fine. You just mill it, and you're good to go. So
on the wild rice mild that I do from Dawson, you act like you're cooking a batch, and then you just put that in with the mash. So you cook it, and then you pour in the liquor too, which is like so mushroomy and earthy. And then I know that Barley John's back in the day, at least on the small brew pub, they do a cereal mash. It was one of the few things that they went out of their way to cereal mash, I believe. Which was like a hobbled together process because of how small and...
Yeah, I mean, when we did our first wild rice beers years ago, we were cooking wild rice on a pilot system on our 30-gallon kettles, and then like scooping this mushy, real sticky goop into the mash. I mean, it was a mess. So then when BSG started selling the puff stuff, it was great, because you just mill it. It's pre-gelatinized.
Oh.
But that was only, they did it for like a couple years, and then I think the supplier, I don't know what happened, but we got the wild rice from Maltwerks. They actually sell a soup grade wild rice, so it's already kind of broken up.
Oh.
It's like split. So it kind of starts kind of nice, a little easier to work with. So, and yeah, I mean, I get your quintessential wild rice characteristics.
Yeah, let's talk about what it tastes like, because if you had it, you would be like, it's a Pils, but there's other things happening in here for sure.
I've always gotten like a unique sweetness from wild rice. I get nuttiness. A lot of the other guys here will get there's an earthy note to it. Almost, I don't want to say like muddy or dirty, but it has a distinct earthy character to it. But it's clean. It's not an unpleasant flavor whatsoever.
Like I said, I always get kind of like mushroom or like mushroom water with a little black tea.
Sure.
Or what I mentioned to you, that you're like, oh, I get this like faint raspberry. It's almost just like...
Or a grape note almost, maybe.
Right,
yeah. I was like, man, 20% wild rice. It's going to be... I thought for sure it was going to be maybe a little too much. But no, it's nice and balanced. Northern brewer hops for bittering. Satz for flavor and aroma. We used our in-house, it's a German lager strain that we use. I'm sure they would have used an American lager yeast strain. At least that's what Jim said. He said back in the day, the small amount of breweries that were around, where they were just sharing lager yeast all over the place. And I think most of them used an American lager strain, from what I gathered. So, but yeah, when we released the beer, we had Jim got a few of the other former Page employees to swing by. One was a former owner, and it was kind of I just sat back and just watched them this nostalgic experience. They, some of them were like, man, I haven't, it took them back, which I thought was part of the whole point of this whole series, and it was a new fun beer for us. And
so touching just real quick on number 2, which we just kept missing the opportunity to sit down and enjoy together. I had it, got a couple crowlers, had it here, and you wouldn't be here, vice versa.
Yeah.
So it was, tell me about that, like a 1946-ish?
Yeah, it was a specific era. So I was going for like a historical style of lager. So the MBAA, Master Brewers Association of the Americas, did a paper on historical lager beer around World War II, before, during, and after. And they had a small blip. It was 1946, right after the war, for like a 6-month window. It was this really narrow window. Brewers were using a lot of cassava. They were using lots of other forms of fermentables.
Yeah.
There was a lot of fear of worldwide famine, with the the state of the world after the war, people needed to eat. So they were, a lot of what was used for brewing was going to be used for food. So brewers were using all sorts of alternatives.
Other than grain.
Yes.
Right.
So, and like, for whatever reason, I never really understood why specifically it was that short of a period. They were using cassava. So,
Cassava.
which is that's what you make tapioca out of. So.
It's kind of a tuber?
Tuber, yeah.
It looks like a potato.
Looks like a potato. It's white with a brown skin. I think it originated in South Africa or South America, I believe. So trying to source that was a little tricky. We did get it through Maltwerks. Dan was great. You know, we got, it's a powder, so it came in bags of powder. Our original order was stuck on the East Coast from a hurricane last summer, I think. So Dan scrambled around the local market and bought out a local South African market. So Tony, our brewer, brewed it that day, had to dump like 1 to 3 pound bags. It was 300 pounds of cassava.
Oh my gosh.
In the kettle. So, and because cassava is devoid of any nutrients whatsoever, we had to cook it. Cereal mash. So it was kind of a classic American double mash procedure. So
you made like this porridge.
It looked like, I'll send you a photo if you want. It looked like milk in the kettle. It was the weirdest thing. So we had to add an enzyme to liquefy it, and then cook it, and then add that back to the main mash while we were mashing that in, and then another enzyme for conversion because there's no enzymes. So it was a very unique brew day. Turned out great, you know, pretty neutral. Light lager, so cassava's very flavor neutral.
Yeah, I remember the beer was just, it didn't taste like the wild rice effect on this beer, where it's like a layer on top. If anything, it's kind of almost how rice gets used, right? To keep something just even lighter, more neutral, less body.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a fun experiment. So, and then I just saw Shell's just did a beer with cassava. Yeah, I just saw. It's a I forget what kind of style of lager it is, but I think it's in one of their mix packs coming out. So I saw that on the Twitterverse. I was like, oh, cool, another cassava beer. Who'd have thunk it? So
I wonder if they got tubers, if they got people like chopping up.
I don't know. Yeah,
probably not. It sounds difficult.
It was a long process, but it was a fun experiment. So, yeah.
So what other styles have you had wild rice in here?
We've done a wild rice porter, wild rice amber, and then Scarecrow's Friend, our harvest beer in the fall, always has a pinch of wild rice. So those are the 3 we've done. So, and those have been like 10% of the grist, I think. So, but dark beers. And well, the Scarecrow's Friend is more of like an amber, but that's got a lot going on. There's spices, there's others, there's pumpkin, there's corn. The wild rice is kind of a secondary feature in that beer. So
I named that beer.
Did you really? I did not know that.
Yeah, when me and Garth first started, like Zach and Joe already had the business plan, but we were the first wave of marketing, and they named that one, and like the visual like stuck through all the art. It was always like a cocky crow who's kind of like, whatever, this scarecrow, I'm just gonna sit on his shoulder anyway. And I think that's what the art is, right? It's like
scarecrow,
it's kind of like a scarecrow getting no respect a little bit.
Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, nice job.
All right, brother. Well, number 4, any ideas, or just what's on your short list of wishes? Because I remember you said these 2 that became 2 and 3 when we sat down for number 1.
Yep. I don't have one on the docket right now. I think it'll take a little hiatus until maybe the fall. Yeah. So nothing in the works quite yet. So, but we will continue the series for sure. Yeah.
So. No, I think it's awesome that you're digging deep and finding random 6-month windows where there was a sub-style and go after it.
Yeah. That's what it's all about.
What it tastes like, we'll probably never know.
We'll never know, but
I mean, we know in your glass, but
fun to explore.
Yeah. All right. Cheers, brother. Keep bloggers alive.
We will do our best.
Bloggers.